Hey, howdy, hey, my brewing brothers and sisters.
Greetings.
All right. Welcome to another episode of Brew Strong, Pandemic Edition, which I'm enjoying. So I think we're going to keep Pandemic Edition going for a long time.
I certainly do prefer it up here in the den as opposed to downstairs in the garage.
Well, if you behave yourself, we will allow you to be upstairs versus downstairs.
Yeah, you know, it was 115 over the weekend here.
Right.
It was boiling.
This is God's message to you that the end of the world is nigh.
Yes, cinders and ash raining down on us.
Right. It's not bad enough that the whole world is burning around us, that ash is pouring out of the sky at a frightening rate. It is, you can't see the sun anymore.
Right.
But there's, at least here, there were winds over 60 miles an hour here. It's like, okay, it's like literally being in a firenado here. It's pretty bad.
Well, I noticed one guy in San Francisco had convinced his kids that they had moved to Mars overnight. That's where the red sky was coming from.
Nice. I wish I had thought of that one.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, there you go. Well, I bet you who would have thought of that?
Our good friend John Blickman.
There you go. He's clever enough. He would have been on the ball. He would have thought of that. He's thought of lots of great brewing things as well.
Right.
He created a lot of seminal brewing pieces of equipment.
Innators, as they're called. Yeah.
Yes. I just like the word seminal. He's a brilliant guy, and the only question to his sanity is that he sponsors this show and has for coming on nigh on decades. He has been sponsoring this show, so you don't have to pay for it. And if you get a chance, I would highly suggest you ask at your homebrew shop about looking at some touchy-feely, some Blickman Brewing, Blickman Engineering brew equipment, and maybe check out their website, or send an email to John Blickman, feedback@blickmanengineering.com. Also, if you're considering opening your own craft brewery, they have professional scale gear as well too. So check that out.
Yep.
Always a good option, Blickman Engineering. So check them out. All right. So today we've been doing Q&A questions. We did a show just before this, which is live on Facebook.
That's right.
If you get a chance, you go over to the Brewing Network page. You can see the video of us doing this live, but if you tune in when we are live, which we've been doing 1 p.m. Wednesdays Pacific time for the last few weeks, and we're going to do it for at least a few weeks more, you can ask your own questions there in the comments section. A lovely Miss Bevo is grabbing the questions and posting them for this, so I can see them in a chat while all this happens. It's like the masses of people behind the scenes that make this quality program happen is one Bevo. Well, and then JP is processing them into podcasts for us. So there you go. Let's see here. I got a question from Luke. Luke asked, a mere 9 months ago. Yes, this is the thing. If you ask a question of brewstrong@thebrewingnetwork.com, if you send your questions there, you're not going to get a response. And we don't check them until we're doing Q&A shows. So yeah, if you need to get a hold of us, you should email us directly. John, it's howtobrew.com.
Yep.
For me, it's John@howtobrew.com. For me, you do Jamil @hereticbrewing.com. You can do jzainashef@gmail.com. Or you can still hit me at Jamil@mrmalty.com. He says, "Hi, Jamil. I know it's a long shot, but I am a home brewer and fan of your podcast. I live in Maine, but I'm in California for a couple of days and we'll be visiting your brewery tomorrow. If you happen to be around, I would love to meet you and get a tour of the brewery. Thanks, and brew strong, Luke. Well, Luke, unless your trip extended to 9 months, I doubt you're still here. But I appreciate you stopping by. I hope you had a lovely time and enjoyed the brewery. It's great to meet homebrewers. John and I both love meeting homebrewers, listeners, pro brewers.
Yep.
It's a blast to hang out with you and chat about brewing. That's the reason why we do the show. For no other reason. We enjoy doing this. Yep. So if you're around, you just need to understand that if you send email to like the Brew Strong thing, that's really just for show ideas and questions. So we don't get those very quickly. You're always welcome to stop by. And if you do, just ask if I'm here, and I'm glad to take some time away and say hi and all that. Sometimes people will say, "Oh, I saw you. It looked like you were working hard. I didn't want to interrupt." I appreciate that. But, if you've traveled from Maine, go ahead and, let me be the one to say, "I'm sorry, I'm too busy," which I pretty much never do. I think I've maybe said it once.
Always got time for one beer.
Exactly. It gives me an excuse to drink. So it's greatly appreciated. Because then I can say to the wife, "Well, the guy came from Maine. What am I supposed to? I can't say no. Come on." Like, it gives me a little, there you go.
Yeah.
Rich, who was listening live off of Facebook, he was asking, are there any other interesting alternatives to using olive oil in place of oxygenation? Maybe coconut oil or a blend of them.
I think the point to answering that question is that the yeast have a millennia-long record of effectively using oxygen to generate the variety of lipids and sterols they need for growth. Substituting an oil that contains one of those substances or a combination of a couple oils may work for a lot of it, but I don't think it's going to solve the problem. So aeration by itself is probably better.
I'm with you 100%, John. And I think if somebody, could somehow come up with some dosing of, sterols and liquids in a little syringe that you're in a tablet that you threw in. Okay, I'm still doubtful that it would be the optimum flavor that we're looking for, because one of the things to keep in mind is people have grown used to and have set the gold standard of beer quality based off of oxygen being used to provide that, which there's a lot of complexities to it, and there's subtle differences. I think, they've done the oil thing and they're like, well, people can't really tell the difference. It's like, yeah, people can't really tell the difference of between different hops. So I don't know that it's really the best road to go down. It's fun, especially if you're homebrewing. I give it a shot, and, again, maybe somebody comes up with something, but for me, I'm with John. I'm not too convinced. Let's see here. Fermenting with fruit.
Oh, yes.
I got this email from Brady, and
Jamil's a pro.
He says, first off, love the show. Thanks for all the knowledge and cool tips. He says, I was listening to your May 16th, 2018 episode. This is the problem with everything being recorded. I say things and then, it's brought back up and thrown in my face.
Yeah. Safe to say we were drunk that day.
Why? Well, yeah, exactly. Well, it was like any other May 16th. Brady, why you throw this in my face? He says, episode about adjuncts. And while talking about brewing with fruits, Jamel mentioned that at Heretic, he was doing a separate fermentation for the fruits and then adding them to the beer in the bright tanks. Can you expand on this process? What does your separate fermentation process look like? Do you boil the fruit and water to make a fruit wort? How do you ensure the fruit is sanitized and won't cause an infection? All right. Lots of great questions in there. We could probably do a show on this. I don't know. So mainly I was talking about in the process of making sour beers, lambic type beers. Because one of the things that happens when you just throw, all right. There's so many different types of fruit you could use, but what I mainly am using at Heretic is Aseptic Fruit puree from Oregon Fruit. And so they should give me a discount for giving them a plug. Yeah. Unfortunately, they won't. But because it's aseptic, and there's other aseptic fruit suppliers. The Aeceptor Fruit is clean and pure. You don't have to worry about any contamination. You can just put it in your beer. We take that and ferment it, so we don't have to boil it or anything like that. It's got all its fruity goodness without doing that, and we can put that into a fermenter. And because the bricks of most of these fruit purees ranges between 6 and 11, it is a low enough bricks that it'll just directly ferment. You can add cal ale yeast to it, and it will ferment out in a day.
And 6 to 11 bricks is equivalent to saying 6 to 11 Plato.
Mm-hmm.
So, and which is 4 times the gravity points. Or, I mean, 4 times the Plato to get gravity.
1024 to 1044.
Yeah.
And within a day, it pretty much ferments out because it's all pretty much fructose. And fructose is very easy for yeast to ferment. So you don't even need much of anything in there because, again, it's not that high in AB gravity. So it will ferment it, and it'll ferment it readily. So we've done this multiple times. Or many times. So there are beers where we put the fruit into the beer, and there's beers where we ferment the fruit separately. If it's something that is going to be very boldly fruity, it's better to ferment the fruit separately and then add it, because you're going to get a lot more character from the fruit. If you're working with other fruit that needs to be sanitized, yeah, I would pasteurize it first with some hot water. The thing is, especially whole fruit, you need to macerate it. You need to, break it up, and you can combine it with water. If you are working on higher gravity beers, it can be a problem trying to use fruit and with water, or even some of these purees, because they'll be a lower bricks, and it'll water down your beer.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
But if you want to use it if you use if you're trying to make a high ABV beer and you want to add the fruit and water, I mean, you can boil it and concentrate it down, or you can buy fruit concentrates that are also aseptic, where they've removed some of the water for you. And often the commercial ones, they remove the water under vacuum, so they don't have to heat it up as much. It's cheaper to do, and it results in less cooked flavor of the fruit. So those can be quite nice too. And so you could use those. And again, they're aseptic. Using whole fruit, the only times I generally use whole fruit is when I know the source of the whole fruit. So we have a mandarin farmer for our mandarin IPA. He holds it on the trees for us. He specifically, grows we're buying pretty much his entire crop, and he holds it on the trees until it's just right, and then picks it for us. That's something that we do, whole fruit. And so when you can kind of control the whole fruit, I wouldn't go to the grocery store and buy whole fruit and use that, because often it hasn't been ripened, tree ripened, or plant ripened. It's just picked green and then gassed or whatever to make it ripen. So I tend to, the flavor on those is not as good. So I tend to avoid those. That's why I think Oregon Fruit and other puree suppliers, they will work with multiple farmers or entire farms and buy like the entire crop, and so they can dictate when it's harvested, and they'll get it at the peak of aromatics and flavor versus, well, and they'll also look at processing, but they don't need to truck it to a grocery store to sit on a shelf for weeks, right? They are
Right.
doing it right then and there. And so it tends to be, I think, superior in a lot of ways to getting whole fruit from a grocery store. Whole fruit from a farm, that's a different thing. Did I answer the question?
I think so. Yeah.
Did I ramble a little bit?
Can you give us an example of a beer that you do with whole fruit into the fermenter, not a separate fermentation?
That would be like the Mandarin IPA.
Okay.
Right.
And you crush the oranges and throw them in?
He'll juice them for us, but since it's not aseptic, we actually have to add that juice to the whirlpool to pasteurize it. So again, you need to apply some heat in that case. All right, let's take a short break. We'll be back right after this. All right, we're back. We're enjoying Brew Strong live on the Brewing Network. Let's see here. Jimmy asks live on Facebook, is there a reason why homebrew stores seem to only carry 10% phosphoric acid and not 85%? Is it more of a hazard at 85 than lactic acid at 88 that is carried most commonly? Yeah, that's the issue. It's the percentage concentration of an acid does not match
Corrosivity.
It's right, acidifying capacity. So they are completely different. But perhaps this is why in our previous show, when we talked about, it was
Mark,
it was an email. Yeah, Mark. He asked. He was using 20 mils of phosphoric.
yeah.
That still seems like a lot, even at 10%.
Well, 20 mils of 10% phosphoric is equivalent to, I think, 3 mils of the 88% lactic.
Oh, okay. Well, then maybe not too much.
Yeah, they were similar, but
for his water, it seemed like a little too much.
Yeah, and he was using both. The way I interpreted that email is using both of those acids into that 8.5 gallons, which I think was excessive.
Well, and I will say this: just use the lactic from your homebrew shop. Don't use phosphoric. I know people talk about phosphoric, having a better flavor or something like that. We use phosphoric here at Heretic, but we get the 85%, and then we have all the hazardous gear to use it. For homebrew, lactic acid, 88%,
safe.
That's the way to go. It's safe, and it really doesn't have that much flavor. I think it's really difficult to, unless you're finding yourself needing to use a lot, which then I would question something else about your process or your water or something like that. And I would correct it there versus trying to use a massive amount of lactic acid. Jason is asking, I'm in, this is the guy who was from the previous show that was going to open his
farm,
barley growing, malting, brewing, winery, distillery, hop growing location. Did I miss anything? Auto body repair. No. He says, Jason says, I'm in Missouri Southwest. I would not be doing this for at least 15 years. One of the things is I'm not sure you can grow great barley malting barley in Missouri? Is it not more of a northern crop?
It typically is more of a northern crop because you too much water will result in too much protein. Now, of course, there are barley varieties such as grown in the UK that are adapted to that wetter climate. And so we could look at one of those varieties that might work in Missouri. But again, you can't just grab, barley from the health food store and plant it and think it's going to work.
Well,
You need to research that.
It's also the amount of sun. It's,
Yeah.
It's
There are different varieties of barley for different climates.
Right. I'd not be doing this and I've not personally grown barley, so I got my head up my ass on this one, Jason. I would not be doing this for at least. Don't confirm. No, don't post. No, please, no. Oh, I'm just kidding. I'm in Missouri. I wouldn't be doing this for at least 15 years, but if I am fairly serious, I am going to start preparing the property. Well, yeah, probably take a while. The idea of growing barley would be for base malt only and not as 100% of the total grain bill. Still, I mean, it's got to be. We were talking last show about how important base malt is to malt character of a beer. So it's really critical. I've recently added distilling to my 21 years brewing experience and really like the idea of having a distillery on premises to aid in barrel aging. Yeah. I also want to age whiskey in fresh Missouri oak barrels, then imperial stout, then whiskey back in the barrel. I've been doing the distillery thing for 4 years, the brewery thing for 10 years, and I have not been able to do that once yet. So it takes a lot of time because a lot of the distillery barrels that we use that have the best flavor are 10-year distillery barrels. So it's 10-year cycle to do the distilling with them and then do the beer with them, which is like a 1 or 2 year cycle, and then do the distill. If I tried to do this multiple times, I'd be dead already. I'm old. Let's see, Missouri oak barrels. When neutral, I want to start using the barrels for my sour program. Okay, you're going to be dead before these barrels are neutral. I think that's part of the problem. Barrels for your sour program. I'm at the beginning of this at home level now. One of the things about doing sour beers, you need to really do them in wine barrels, not spirit barrels. You can do them in spirit barrels. The problem with spirit barrels is the staves are very thin. Wine barrels are 3 times as thick, I think, which controls the ingress of oxygen into the beer. And you need to be very careful with that. If you let too much oxygen in too quickly, you end up with something tasting of acetone and garbage versus fine sour beer. Fine sour beer, barrel aged sour beer takes a lot of time and takes proper conditions. There's a reason why the folks at Cantillon and elsewhere have this history. Trying to do it quickly is almost always a failure, and even people who have the proper stuff don't necessarily do it. We end up spending 3 years on these sours, these barrel aged sours. You've got to use a thick quality wine barrel. So that's one of the things about the sours, and just the cycle time takes forever. My advice would be to pick one thing that you really want to do that really is your passion of all the many things that you've mentioned, and just focus on that, do that, and try to perfect that. And once you've perfected that, then by all means, take on the next thing. But pick any one of those. But trying to do all of those things, I mean, it sounds wonderful, but oh my God, you'll end up doing all those things poorly versus, I think it's better to try and do one thing really well than a number of things poorly. That's just my opinion, but
we want you to succeed.
Yes, I'd love to come visit you. 320 acres. I'm sure Blickman would be up for coming and going shooting.
Oh yeah.
And I haven't been to Missouri in a while. But yes, one of these days. So, Jason, you let us know when you're up and running, and then we're there. And we will come and we will admit we were wrong, that you have pulled off the ultimate farm brewery, distillery, winery. There you go. Brian asks, John Palmer, I have purchased your water book and want a refund. No. And I must admit, as a guy who flunked high school chemistry, it's rough. Any thoughts to help us simpletons to get the best out of your vast knowledge? Your giant gourd-like brain.
I think I did a good job of distilling the water book into a couple of chapters in the most recent edition of How to Brew. So the 2017 edition of How to Brew condensed what I learned in doing the water book.
So you're saying instead of buying the water book, or the water book could have been a couple chapters long.
Yeah. Well, for different audiences, different nuances, but yes,
yes. Yeah. That's why some people like S&M and some people don't, or the majority of people don't. The majority of people don't, and a few people do.
Right.
Same thing with the water book. Is that what you're saying? Is this
your? Yeah. If you like the long extended masochism, then the water book. If you want the short and sweet masochism, then just a couple chapters in How to Brew.
There you go.
But distilling it down to a couple of takeaways. In general, adding hardness to your water is a good thing. Like a teaspoon of gypsum, just to add some more calcium, generally works.
Less is better in general. Don't go overboard. Keep it simple. Make your adjustments small. See how the beer turns out. Then maybe you can go a little bit more, but just be moderate in your approach, and test, drink, try again. If you go nuts and you put 10 things in at high levels, you're never going to know what happened.
Right. The other important takeaway is that what we are doing with water adjustment, number one is we're trying to dial in our mash pH. So you adjust your water using software to achieve your target mash pH somewhere in the range of 5.2 to 5.6 measured at room temperature. After that, you can play with the sulfate to chloride ratio by manipulating your salt amounts. Those are the two things that you're trying to do with water adjustment. Get software, read the chapters. Don't try to match a specific brewing city, because then you're chasing your tail trying to dial in on something that doesn't need to be so exact. Brewing is cooking. We are seasoning the beer, and 1 teaspoon of salt for chef A may only be a half teaspoon of salt for chef B. So don't be rigid in your thinking. We're seasoning the beer, we're adjusting it to taste when it comes to those final numbers.
All right. We'll be back with more of your questions right after this. Okay, we're back. We're live with Brew Strong on the Brewing Network. And you can also ask your questions live on Facebook while you're listening to the show if you tune in live. And you can even find the video there, or the podcast will be available for download. I want to thank our good friends at Brew Chatter for sponsoring us. Good folks out there. They got a beautiful place out in Sparks, Nevada, right outside of Reno. and they've got their own little bar in there where they hand curate some great beers on tap that you can enjoy an adult beverage while you shop for your homebrew ingredients. How about that? They've got a tremendous array of homebrew ingredients. Everything that they have in there is stuff that they use. They don't sell any crap. They sell stuff that they believe in, that they've tried, that they know, and they've got the skill and the knowledge to help you use it appropriately as well. Whether it's in person or online, they will help you out. So check them out, brewchatter.com. All right. Let's see. We'll go back to the mailbag here.
Okay.
And Mail from Norway has asked, he says, "Hi, Brew Strong team." So we're a team, you and I.
That's right.
And Bevo.
And Bevo's part of our team, yes.
She's absolutely part of the team. I don't really count JP and Justin as part of the team. I mean, really, they help out, but,
They're subs. Yeah.
Let's see. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for the program. It's great help for home brewing community. I was wondering what your view was on fermenting under pressure, which is supposed to allow brewing lagers at ale temperature, lower ester production, etc. I've been doing a Ask Me Anything segment on Beer Advocate and answering questions there, and that was one of the things that came up there as well. To me, the argument of saying that the process mimics the hydrostatic pressure observed in large fermenters is not valid, as in our case, the pressure comes from CO2, which is likely to affect pH. In addition, since it has proven that yeast expresses stress under hydrostatic pressure, I find it strange that increasing pressure would help for obtaining better beer. What do you guys think? I'm all right. I'm with them. I think we did some shows on brewing under pressure with John Blickman.
Yep.
And where I think he went up to like 100 psi or something, didn't he? Or 60 psi. He was like, this is at
it was
5,
like 2 atmospheres.
atmospheres. No, he did like a high, he did
5?
a really high one. I think so. I may be wrong, but so here's one of the things is that yeast under stress and high hydrostatic pressure, high pressure in the fermenter produces stress. Now, what the stress is, they're spheroid objects filled with liquid, so the pressure is not quite as bad. It's like when you go scuba diving. You don't feel the pressure. I've been down to 150 feet seawater. You don't really feel the pressure on your tissues. There's things that happen to your body with absorption of gases that becomes an issue. Nitrogen, namely, right? Nitrogen narcosis, the possibility of nitrogen saturation in the bends. That is the issue, I think, with the yeast. Not that they're feeling this pressure, but over time, it changes the osmotic gradient somehow, or it changes the absorption of gases, and that's what the issue is. So,
more CO2 can dissolve under higher pressure.
Exactly. There's more CO2 in solution, and more CO2 is getting into the yeast, and that is CO2, I believe, is kind of like a waste product for the yeast. And so if they're getting more CO2 into their bodies, that's where the problem is, and that's what suppresses some of the things. It also, increased CO2 or increased hydrostatic pressure will, suppress ester formation, but it is also a stress factor, which will produce more sulfur, right?
Right.
So sulfur is a characteristic of lager fermentations as well. So, part of that is maybe why people say it's more, it can be more lager-like. The reality is the quality of the fermentation is not what I would say is high quality. It's like we were talking earlier, previous show about, or I don't know where we're talking about using oil, or
Right.
at the top of this show about using oil to replicate, the aeration that's needed for yeast. You can do it, but is it producing the best beer? People you know, have come to know what a true lager fermentation tastes like. And if you're, you know, trying to fake it with ale yeast under high pressure or using high pressure lager yeast, the flavor is not exactly the same. It can be okay, but you know, if you I personally, I think the purpose of homebrewing is to make the best beer in the world, right?
Right.
Not just to have alcohol to drink. If you want to have alcohol to drink, by all means, go ahead and do it. But then why are you bothering to try and make a pseudo lager? You know, just to make ales, right? Or get yourself a used fridge and do you know, an actual lager fermentation. So I'm, you know, I'm just not a fan of this at all. I did run across, there was a guy on the Ask Me Anything, and he was like, he's a commercial brewer, and he's like, well, you know, what I was trying to do, he's actually using some pressure to not to, you know, ferment warmer, but because the brewer he's in now has lower height tanks. The he found he needed to use a little bit of pressure to simulate the tanks he was at before, in the brewery he was at before. So that can be part of the equation there. I think that, you know, yes, I think you can use it as a tool. This knowledge that you know, it kind of changes. Hydrostatic pressure does absolutely change the character of the beer fermented. It is an issue, but I don't think you can use it to replace, you know, quality lager fermentation at a lower temperature.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in so many cases, the use of pressure is trying to fix a problem that you don't have. Then the beauty of homebrewing is that at the scale we're brewing at with, you know, we don't have issues with hydrostatic pressure generating higher carbon dioxide concentration and stressing the yeast. You know, we don't need to try to replicate those results. If, you know, in the case of the commercial brewer, where he's identified a specific issue he needs to try to work around, then yes, pressure can be one of the tools that you use to address it. But you know, not every situation needs a big hammer.
Well,
whatever
that's your personal call. I mean, you know, if you like a big hammer, you know, that's kind of the way it goes. Let's see here. We got a ton of questions coming in. I don't know that we're going to get to everybody. Let's see here. Jimmy says, excluding stainless due to cost, what fermenters do you recommend to new brewers? I've tried the HDPE 6.5 ale pails, the polypropylene 7.9 gallon buckets from More Beer, and the PET for Monster. I prefer a spigot over a siphon for a simple gravity transfer into the keg. I'm looking to pick up one or two more fermenters, but I'm on a budget.
Some of the nicest fermenters I've seen are the Spidell plastic barrels. They have a big wide mouth plastic lid. It's a thicker HDPE plastic with a spigot and so on. So they're easy to clean. They're a little pricey, but you know, I mean, like, you know, $35, $40 to $50 depending on the size you get. But I mean, they'll last a long time too. Mm-hmm. So I've got one or two of those I like. But when you look at, you know, a comparable price stainless steel, you know, those are very nice too, in terms of durability and ease of cleaning, like the stainless steel buckets.
There you go. Let's see here. Dolph, he's back he's double dipping here. He's back for seconds. He says, sorry to go back to malt flavor and aroma with a follow-up from the last show. Can oxygenation have an effect on malt aroma? I'm familiar with effects on flavor, but when comparing imported Märzen Oktoberfest beers to my own, there's an almost sweet smell in the imported, if that makes sense. In my own beers, I only seem to get a slight amount of the aroma after that beer sits and warms for a bit. Well, that's the issue, is what you're sensing is oxidation, staling, either heat staling or oxidative staling. And what it'll produce is kind of a sweet, kind of weird candy-like, sometimes caramel candy-like, or even like a sweet hard candy character to the beer.
Yeah.
And that's not malt character. That is oxidized malt character.
Yeah.
Mike Murphy asks, he says, I brewed an Imperial Strawberry Blonde Ale. The first time I brewed it, lightning struck and the beer was delicious. Isn't that the way it is? You can't get back there. Great strawberry flavor came through. I've brewed it 5 times since and haven't been able to recreate the magic. The strawberry came across as tart. I used fresh strawberries that I puree in a blender and empty in a muslin bag and then freeze in a plastic bag in the shape of a round cylinder. When I keg the beer, I add the frozen puree in the bag to the corny keg. I let it sit for 3 days and then rack into another corny keg, leaving the strawberry matter behind. What advice can you give to recreate the magic? I think a big part of the problem may come from the strawberries themselves, because strawberries are an agricultural crop and they're completely different, can be completely different every year.
Crop to crop. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you may be getting, strawberries that are far more sour and they can have a lot of acid in them. You may be getting strawberries that have far less flavor. And so that's one of the issues I was mentioning when we're talking about, using fruit. A company like Oregon Fruit or one of these other, brewery suppliers of, a fruit, or they do it for food service and everything else. They are dealing with farms that they deal with on a regular basis. And, for someone, they'll buy an entire crop. So they're like, look, leave it on the plant longer, leave those strawberries longer. They're not ready yet. They'll taste them, they'll test them, they'll see, yeah, these are good strawberries, and now they're full flavor. Now they have the acid we want. Now they have the sugar we want. They're ready to pick, and they'll, take the crop and then they'll process them right away. Whereas at the grocery store, strawberries get so soft and mushy that they get picked early and they get picked hard and green, and then they ripen up later. And so you're really not getting the best flavor from them. So, I mean, I go to the grocery store at least once a week. So I got nothing against grocery stores, but this is one of the things that you have to kind of be careful with. And the grocery stores will have some great stuff, but generally what you're looking for, the grocery store in that case, is frozen fruit, because then they've left it on the vine. It's stuff that was there. They will often, do that more of the late harvest, and it's got more flavor and it's less sour. So I would, focus on those than using fresh strawberries. So I'm not sure, because it sounded like it was fresh strawberries, because he's blending them and putting them in a muslin bag and freezing them. Yeah, so that might be the issue. I mean, other issues are, and one of the things you can do to recreate the magic is you might consider just a tiniest amounts of maybe like a fruit extract. You have to be careful though, because a lot of them are very fake, but strawberry can be okay. And just, do your fruit thing, but, a tiny drop of this fruit extract could brighten up some of those aromatics, and a big part of the flavor comes from the aromatics. So maybe try that.
Sounds good.
There you go. All right. Leaf asks, if you would craft a recipe for an American IPA for the good book in 2020, how would that look? American IPA. I would go, good, high quality American 2-row. I'd go a little bit of crystal malt, a lighter crystal.
5%. 3%?
Yeah, small amounts. And then, a lot of the, more trendy, modern hops, I would put a bit in the bittering, but I put
Yeah.
a lot more in the whirlpool and dry hop. I'd make it, nice and clear. I wouldn't go hazy on that. I'd probably use something like a 001 or a yeast along those lines to give it a nice bright flavor. More focused on the hops than on the malt. Like an IPA right now, California IPA.
Yeah, I like a good bittering hop addition in my IPAs.
I wouldn't go as hard and heavy as in the past. I think things have trended towards a little bit softer.
Yeah.
There was a period where it was insanely bitter.
Right.
Good firm bittering, but I wouldn't go harsh.
Yeah, I kind of like to go 30% of my total IBUs for the bittering hop addition, and then make up the rest in whirlpool hops, like in dry hopping, like you say.
Yeah, while it may not produce isomerized alpha acids, dry hopping can produce quite a bit of bitterness as well.
Yeah,
Bitter character to the beer.
Right.
No. All right.
Did Bevo have an input on that one?
I don't know. She is scouring the comment section.
Okay.
She's got a work cut out for her. She's got to select the wheat from the chaff.
Right.
If I know our listeners, there's a lot of garbage to go through before you get the gems. It's it's like digging through civet cat poo, trying to find the coffee beans.
There you go.
It takes some digging, and it's stinky, dirty work.
Very apt.
Thank you, Bevo. Hopefully she's listening to that. Let's see. Max asks, Dear Jamil and John, does residual sugar have an effect on CO2 solubility? Bevo says, no input. Let's see. Does residual sugar have an effect on CO2 solubility in finished beer? I brewed an imperial stout that has a fairly high finishing gravity, 1030, and have it on tap in my kegerator. I force carbonate, and all the kegs in my kegerator are regulated to the same pressure, but the imperial stout seems significantly less carbonated than the others. Does the residual sugar in a high final gravity beer actually reduce the CO2 solubility, or is it likely just reducing the perception of carbonation? Brew Strong Max.
I'm inclined to believe that it's the latter, where the high finished gravity reduces that impact, compared to, say, a Helles at the same pressure.
Yeah, gas solubility is based off of gas pressure on a liquid. I think, as the liquid is less liquid and more other
Dissolved
things,
solids. Yeah.
dissolved solids, then perhaps that does have an impact.
Well,
but on the other hand, it's the liquid that is carbonated. It's not the residual sugars that are carbonating or not. I mean, they're not carbonating, but the liquid itself is carbonated. That's a good question. I could argue it both ways. I don't really know.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
It is a good question.
Somebody actually knows, and they're going like, you guys are such idiots. Because the liquid still carbonates up fully, but the amount of liquid you actually have has been reduced, right?
Yeah, Yeah.
Or is that true? I mean, if you take, let's say I have a liter of water,
Well,
and
look at it. Yeah.
I have 100 grams of sugar, and I add or 300 grams of sugar, and I add that to my liter of water, right? The volume has increased of the liquid. The sugar didn't disappear. Even though you may see the crystals disappear, they have gone into solution, but the volume of the liquid has increased to compensate for that action.
Coca-Cola versus Perrier.
Right. Well, I agree. The perception is going to be that it's less carbonated, even though the carbonation is the same. Right. But yeah, I'm just trying to figure out. So when you add sugar to something, the volume increases. The water didn't go anywhere. The sugar itself didn't go anywhere. It increased the volume because it's still there. Yeah, so I would say that it's if I had to make a comment, I would go with it's a perception issue more than anything.
That's what
interesting. It's an interesting question. He threw us for a moment there. All right, we need to take another short break. We'll be back right after this. All right, we're back. We're having some fun here doing Brew Strong live on the brewingnetwork.com. Let's see here. Brian says, so when can I expect more locker room humor? Based on past episodes and past comments, I've been listening for a long time. I missed the spicing of good juvenile side comments like cut off a fresh piece. That was not a juvenile comment. I take offense at that, Brian. That was a sage piece of advice from a seasoned brewer telling you to snap off a fresh piece of hose when you needed to do a transfer versus, when looking at your ugly, disgusting, withered hose.
Discolored even.
Discolored, yes. From lots of use, much tugging on the hose. It's not worth holding on to your hose so tightly. You should let your hose go every once in a while and snap yourself off a fresh piece. I think that's clearly what should be done in that case, Brian. I think you're thinking that was a juvenile comment. It's completely wrong. Locker room humor. I don't know. Really, I think the pandemic has scared me straight. I think it's made me be less offensive. I don't know.
We think we have a wider audience now.
Perhaps our audience is spread wider than it was before.
That's right.
I imagine people now listening are spread wider. Brian is probably spread wider than Dolph is. I mean, they're probably spread. Should I say spread more farther apart?
I imagine Bevo sees that spread too, as well.
Oh yeah, and I think Bevo has enjoyed being spread wider.
And seeing us spread more widely.
Right, yes. Traveling, things like that. We've been spread all over the place. Yeah. I know you've been spread, Michigan, California,
down under,
down under. Yes, you like being down under.
Yes, I do.
Right.
Some of my favorite people are down under. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I agree. Yeah, the people down under,
south of the border.
South of the border, they do a good job. Yeah, Brian, I don't know what you mean about locker room humor. There's never been a such thing on this show. We've really spent our time
trying to nip that in the bud. Yeah,
nip it in the bud. We are professionals talking about a very serious subject here, and we're taking great offense to your saying that that we're juvenile. Just nothing could be further from the truth. Dolph asks, in the Brewing Classic Styles process section, Eva says, "Oh Lord." It's so good having Bevo. Let's see. Dolph says, in the Brewing Classic Styles process section, the recommendation is to do your best to remove trub from the wort prior to pitching yeast. If this is not done efficiently, would there really be a noticeable difference in clarity from those extra cold break proteins being present during fermentation? No. It's not that important. It mainly, the difference could possibly be in long-term stability and staling, but it's not that big a deal. People transfer just tons of trub, and it turns out fine.
Yeah.
There was even a question which we didn't get to, and I'm very sorry to all the email folks that didn't get their questions read. We missed out on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions. There was a lot in the chat this time. About
we'll address those
trub.
next week.
Oh, we absolutely can. Maybe we should just try and hammer through and catch up on Q&A. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about it that much. I generally think it's better to clear the trub from the wort as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I think that's the better way to go. There's no reason to carry it over. Try and do your best to kind of remove it, but don't freak out if you get some trub in there. It's not the end of the world.
If you look at brew in the bag and no chill overnight, like the Australians do, they make great beers that way with total trub carryover. So it's not the end of the world if you do carry some over, but in general, better practice is less trub carryover is probably better for long-term flavor stability.
Well, and there you have it. Thanks everyone for joining us on this episode of Brew Strong. Like I said, if you're listening live, we're going to do this every week until we catch back up, and then probably then some. Bevo and I were talking about maybe carrying this out for a while longer, just because one, I'm enjoying it. I think you're enjoying it too, John, and it gives us an opportunity to really kind of catch up and make sure we don't get behind again.
Right.
So,
and have a beer in the middle of the day.
There you go. Right. So 1 p.m. Pacific time on Wednesdays. I mean, we could shift later if we had to. I don't know. But come and join us. You can listen live on Facebook, and you can ask your own questions. A lot of people did today. They jumped in and asked questions, and that really helped the show, I think. So a lot of appreciation to all you guys, Dolph and Brian and Leaf and Mike and Jimmy and Jason and Rich and Eric and Jimmy and everybody else. Thank you so much for participating in the show, and thank you very much to John Blickman for sponsoring the show, and my friends at Brew Chatter.
Right.
Be sure to check them out and support them. We would appreciate you send an email to feedback@blickmanengineering.com and tell him that you appreciate he paid for the show. If nothing else, that's the way that you can support the show and make sure that we stay able to provide you this very serious, non-juvenile, completely lacking in locker room humor show for your brewing needs. Until then, everybody, brew strong.
Brew strong, everyone.